Hello, I'm Mike Vinsel. I'm continuing reading Travels with Nobody by me, Michael Vinsel. And so I left off on the top of page 19, okay, and that's chapter 1. So I'm going to back up a little bit, read the last paragraph I had just read, and then I'll continue. So this is the last paragraph of page 18. It was spring semester of my sophomore year, a year after I'd transferred to New Dartford High, that I met Chuck Lombardi. He and I went to our first Grateful Dead concert that May, and from then on, Chuck, Rich, Pete, and I became our own crew. I could certainly discuss Bob Dylan lyrics with them. So it was in the beginning, in high school. We remain friends to this day. Me, 57, living in Japan, Pete in Montreal, Rich in Vermont, and Chuck in Boston. Okay, so there I was, day one of my first trip across the country in my 1970 Volvo 164, on my way to Buffalo, that day's goal. What would I have been thinking about as I drove? The highlight of the previous 3 summers had been the Berkshire Mountains Bluegrass Festivals with Rich, Pete, and Chuck. They were all well read and well informed on issues much better than me. I learned so much from talking to them. When we were still in high school, I had made a point of reading the books they talked about, perhaps to the neglect of my schoolwork. After graduating, Pete and Rich had both been to Europe. Chuck had been a National Merit Scholarship semi-finalist in high school. He could have gone to any college he'd wanted to. I had barely managed to graduate high school at all. I never took the SAT. I knew that if I'd taken it, I wouldn't have done well. It would have been proof positive of my poor academic skills and would lock me out of college. So I never took it. Once, in despair at my inability to get good grades, worrying about my future, my brother Matthew had told me not to worry, that high school didn't matter. Nobody had ever told me that before. I'd been told time and again by everybody else what serious damage to my future I was doing with every failing grade I had earned, as if I had been trying to get bad grades. Matthew told me that it was college that mattered. He told me that indeed you might not like high school, but I would love college. High school was just a means by which one could qualify for college. But there were other ways to get in, he said. He advised me not to take the SAT. Say you're boycotting it over cultural bias, he said. He gave me some examples of that bias. I forget them now, but he told me that what I'd have to do is bide my time. After I turned 24 years old, I would be able to apply to most universities as a non-traditional student. In those cases, the SAT and high school transcript requirements could be waived. Matthew told me to travel, get jobs to pay my way, work a while, meet people, move on when I felt like it, see the world. But wherever you go, he told me, find a community college or even a regular college nearby and enroll in classes, just one by one at first. The point was to cover my high school grades and provide an alternative set of credentials I could use to apply to whatever college I wanted when I decided to do that. He said not to take difficult classes at first. He said only to take classes that would interest me, subjects that I liked, that fit my natural ability. In those classes, do everything you can to get good grades, he told me. If you have enough credits with good grades from a community college, like City College of San Francisco, he mentioned that specifically, you can use those credits to apply to any school you want after you're 24. I crossed the Connecticut River into Vermont and continued on Route 9 through Brattleboro, where Route 9 is the main street. Old brick storefronts and factories, the brick church, a supermarket. I could stop and buy beer if I wanted. if I wanted to. New Hampshire had raised its drinking age from 18 to 20 just a few weeks before I turned 18. Then, just before I turned 20, they raised it to 21, just to spite me, I joked at the time. But Vermont had held out with its drinking age of 18, but it was still early in the day. I just kept driving. Chuck, Pete, and Rich had gone drinking at the Sportsman's Lounge in Brattleboro a few times when they were 18, but I had never gone on any of those trips. I knew that I was at the point where I would have to just be me without my group of friends. So, as just me, what did I want to do with my life? The prospects were limitless, I knew. My mother had died the previous January. Her kidneys had stopped working around the time I was beginning high school. She was on dialysis from that time. Sometimes I would drive her to and from dialysis after school, after I'd gotten my driver's license. Then, in the summer after I graduated from high school, once in the middle of the night, the phone rang. It was Massachusetts General Hospital. Somebody had been in an accident, an organ donor. They had a kidney for my mother, if she wanted it. She did. My father drove her down to Boston that night. The next morning, the operation was complete. She had a new kidney. She was able to come home about a week later, as I remember, after her stitches had healed, she was full of energy. She worked in the yard, bringing her rose beds back into condition, cooked great meals, and even started back working on a braided rug she had set aside for years. It was a miracle. That lasted for about 2 months. She still felt fine when she got a call saying that she needed to go back to Mass General. Her blood work had indicated signs of rejection. She was admitted and put on a course of immunosuppressants. We hoped the rejection would pass, but it didn't. They had to increase the immunosuppressants, which made her extremely vulnerable to infections. But the rejection did not stop. She developed a staph infection. She was told that if they took out the kidney, they could stop the immunosuppressants, and she had a fair chance of fighting off the infection. But she wanted to keep the kidney to try to tough it out. The staph infection festered into an open cavity in her shoulder as big and deep as a golf ball, with purple bruised flesh around it. My father took Philip and me to visit her at the hospital. She sat up in bed, the wound embarrassingly open. She looked at us, trying to be brave, but with tears welling in her eyes. I'm afraid that Philip and I must have scared her with our dumbfounded expressions. I don't remember saying anything. I'm sure we told her we loved her, and I'm sure that she said she loved us, but I remember feeling then that she might not survive this. I had never doubted that she would pull through until that day, but still, I had no experience to compare it to. That's right, she told Philip and me not to worry. She was a trained nurse and had seen worse staph infections than this one. She did tell us that. Then Philip and I left the room to give my father and her some private time. The mood of our walk from the hospital was more than somber. I think even my father grasped the situation. Since we're in Boston, I'm going to take you boys to a restaurant that your mother and I used to go to a long time ago, before you were born. It was one of her favorites, my father said. The restaurant was Durgan Park. My father said that they had the best prime rib in the country. We went. The atmosphere was informal and festive. Long tables had red and white checkered paper tablecloths, like a lobster place would have. They sat strangers together at the same tables, everybody joking and laughing. My father ordered the prime rib for all of us. It was indeed the best prime rib I ever had. I think it was the first prime rib I'd ever had. We ate. The food was good enough to take attention away from the somberness of the day. Dad kept telling us not to worry. She was going to pull through. A week or so later, she went into a coma. I remember going to the hospital with my father and Philip to visit her while she was in the coma. We were led into the room by a nurse who told us to stand at the bedside and she would try to wake my mother. She gently shook her shoulder and said that her children were here to see her. Could she wake up? My mother stirred, turned her face toward us, and groggily opened her eyes. She looked right at me and silently mouthed the words, "I love you." She did the same for Philip. Then Philip and I left to wait in the hallway for our father. Philip and I had not known that a person could be woken up from a coma like that. She remained in a coma for another 4 months. As the months in the coma passed, the doctors told us that even if she were to emerge from the coma, there would be significant brain damage. They didn't want us to have false hope. They were realistic. Then she developed pneumonia. They told my father that any family members who wished to see her had better come soon. My father notified my siblings, and within a couple days they had all flown back to New Hampshire. It was the first time we had all been together for many years. Then, one January night, the doctor called on the phone to let us know that her condition was deteriorating. He would call with updates through the night. Then he called, saying it was over. She had passed. I forget if my father had driven down to Mass General to be there. I don't think he did. No, he was with us at the house. I could not define the impact her death had on me. I could not define the impact her death had had on me. I really didn't know what to make of it. She had been a devout Catholic and had raised our family that way. I had chafed at being forced to go to Mass every Sunday and catechism. I learned the things they had taught us, but I regard them, the Mass, the rituals, the doctrine, to be anthropological artifacts of a distant and ancient culture. To me, they were only as likely to be true to the nature of God or the universe as any other set of rituals from any other culture could be. I could not make myself believe something if I thought it was possible that it wasn't really true. Whatever the truth was, that's what I wanted to believe. But it is impossible to know what the true story is. I've felt that way for as long as I can remember. My mother had had faith. She had tried to explain to me what faith was, and that if you had faith, there was nothing you could not endure. I never told my mother outright that I didn't have any faith. I did not want to offend her or to disappoint her, and I was sure that she would have been disappointed had I ever had a real frank talk with her about it. I remember the weeks leading up to my confirmation in the Catholic Church. We'd had to choose a name, not our real name. It had to be a saint or a disciple of Jesus. I had chosen, only half jokingly, Lucifer. She had not seen the humor in that. Anyway, I was able to simply choose my own name, but change the spelling to Stephen, Stephen, with a PH. I told my friends that I'd taken that name after the Grateful Dead song Saint Stephen. For some reason, I had wanted to convey to them that I didn't really take confirmation seriously. At the ceremony, when I was made to pledge my belief in Jesus and the Holy Trinity and all, I lied obediently. I had to go along to get along. But now, she was gone. That was a long time ago. So here I am on this clear, cool spring day in Japan, sitting by the pond, painting a picture with my thoughts off the leash. Painting, drawing. I usually start with acrylics and then finish up with colored pencil. I'm trying to remember the look of the car. It was a 1970 Volvo 164, such dark green that it was almost black. The seats were cream-colored leather. I remember that. It had been Dr. Law's car. My boss at the orchard, Ted Castro, had let him park it at the orchard to see if any of the crew would want to buy it. One of my friends from high school, Patricia Wrigley, had hooked up with this guy she'd met at something they called LRY, which stood for Liberal Religious Youth. His name was Kevin Paulson from Wisconsin. Pat and Kevin had gone to a rainbow gathering somewhere out west on summer vacation before our senior year. Her parents had allowed her to do that. Kevin had a 1968 Volvo 144, the four-cylinder type. I hadn't known it when I bought my Volvo, but the four-cylinder Volvos were legendary for their reliability. The six-cylinder Volvos were not. My car never left me completely stranded, but it also never ran particularly well. But anyway, I hit it off with Kevin right off the bat. He was really funny. He had a remarkable ability to point out absurdity, and he'd make his comments in a deadpan that made it take a few seconds to recognize that he'd made a joke. He called his car Zippy, after Zippy the Pinhead comics. In the fall, after we had graduated from high school, Pat and Kevin decided to get married. 3 friends of Kevin's from Colorado came to New Hampshire for the wedding. They traveled in 2 late 60s Volvo P1800s. Kevin and those guys knew so much about cars and were so enthusiastic about those particular cars, those with the B20 motors, that I wanted to join that club. So when I saw the old Volvo with the for sale sign on it at the orchard at the time, I saw my opportunity. It was within my grasp. I bought the car for $700. As was, it ran. In the few weeks before I left on my trip out west, while I was still working at the apple orchard, the Colorado guys spent about a month at the Wrigley's house, and I got to know them some. I forget their names. They had long hair and were familiar with rainbow gatherings, of which I was unfamiliar. One of the guys always wore a green cap with a red star on it, a Chairman Mao cap. I never asked him why he wore that hat. Anyway, that guy was friendly to me, but one of the guys, the older brother of the guy with the Mao cap, seemed to have taken an immediate dislike to me. I could sense that he looked down on my Volvo, the one with the B30 motor. I suppose my car revealed to him that I was not a genuine enthusiast. I was just trying to imitate them. Mine was not the right kind of Volvo. But it didn't really matter to me. When I look back on it, I suppose I already knew that insiders in a group can sense when somebody doesn't belong. I didn't know anything about cars or rainbow gatherings, but I knew about bicycles, fishing, and the Berkshire Mountains Bluegrass Festival. I was planning to drive across the country, something that guy had done many times already. I knew. Anyway, the other 2 guys were very nice. Kevin and Pat were planning to go to college at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. They were going to drive there, spending the holidays with Kevin's parents in Wisconsin, and then meet me in Olympia sometime in January. My sister Terry lived in Olympia with her husband Ken and their 2 girls, Cindy and Jeannie. I'd be able to stay there until Kevin, Pat, and I found a place of our own. That was the plan. I left first. I'm trying to remember the details of the interior of my car. I forget where the shifter was. It was an automatic. I forgot what the speedometer and the dials looked like. I drew the car in colored pencil as best I could from memory. I do remember that I had my bicycle in the back seat, wheels removed with quick release hubs, state of the art at the time, and I had my cross-country skis in the back too. Somehow they fit. I could see the tips of my skis and one of the bicycle wheels in the rear-view mirror. I remember that. I drew the rest of the car vague and drew the road scene. This wasn't any particular piece of road. It could be any of many places I saw along the way to California. And that would be, okay, yeah, that's right. That's the picture I showed you before. Okay. So just west of Brattleboro, Vermont, Route 9 rises toward Hogback Mountain ski area. There is a parking area at the top with a store and a snack bar. I remember stopping there on our trips to visit the grandparents back when I was a kid. We would take that same route, all of us loaded into the Volkswagen bus. We'd buy maple sugar. My brothers and I would take turns looking through the coin-operated binoculars. The sign said that on a clear day, you could see the Prudential Building in Boston, 100 miles away. But this time, I didn't stop. I wanted to make it to Buffalo by nightfall. Grandma and Grandpa Phillips lived in East Aurora. I would visit them. If they were up to it, we could go to Niagara Falls the next day. Maybe we could even go to Old Fort Niagara. My father had always loved taking us there. That would be nice. It was not far from their apartment. The car was running okay. It always had been underpowered going up hills, and this was a big hill. Then going down the mountain, I had to use the brakes. I could smell that acrid smell of burning brake pads. I wasn't sure if it was from my car or the truck in front of me, but nothing came of that. I drove on through Wilmington. Most of the buildings appeared to date back 100 years. Clapboards. That's right. Most of the buildings appeared to date back 100 years. Clapboard colonial houses, the Molly Stark house, the Molly Stark statue. Wilmington was all about Molly Stark. That's what I remember. After Wilmington, Route 9 was just a strip of road through the woods. The maps call it the Molly Stark Trail. There were no towns, just a gas station and a couple of ski areas all the way to Bennington. Bennington was a sizable town. I had to be careful to follow the signs for Route 9. There was the Bennington Battle Monument. My father used to lecture us all on the history of the Battle of Bennington and its relation to the Battle of Saratoga in the Revolutionary War. Every year, he'd lecture. I remember my parents used to point out the Walloomsac Inn, where they had stayed on their honeymoon back in the early 1950s. On our family trips in the 1970s, I remember them lamenting that it had fallen into disrepair. This time, in the early 1980s, when I went by, it had deteriorated even more. The paint had long since peeled away. The unprotected wooden clapboards, some cracked and some missing, had bleached to gray. A dilapidated wicker love seat stood forlornly on the porch. It was like a ghost house, but I believe it was still open. I could imagine that it must have been wonderful in its heyday. It's getting late in the day, so I'll put my pencils away and go home. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. So that ends on page 29. Okay, so I'll pick up chapter 2 later. Okay.